take the ranch, ruin the cowboy, and don't come home until Barrett Creek is ours." Those were her stepbrother's orders as he shoved Eleanor Whitmore onto a westbound train, a forged marriage secret instructions sewn into her coat. One command: destroy the man she was about to marry. Everyone in Boston called her useless, too quiet, too bookish, a woman who'd wreck a cowboy in a month. They had no idea what she truly was. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel, follow this story to the very end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels tonight. The train hissed to a stop, and for a long moment, Eleanor Whitmore did not move. She sat with her gloved hands folded in her lap, her spine straight, her eyes fixed on the small window where dust drifted across a wooden platform she could barely read the name of. The other passengers stood gathered their bags, muttered about the heat. She stayed where she was, because she knew what was waiting out there. A stranger, a husband, a man she had been sent to ruin. "Miss," the conductor leaned into the aisle, "this is your stop, Montana Territory. End of the line for the branch." "Yes," she said quietly. "Thank you." She rose. She smoothed her traveling dress, and she picked up the single leather suitcase she had refused to let the porter carry because it held the only things in the world she trusted: her father's old ledgers, a bundle of letters no one was supposed to see, and a mind that 10 years of humiliation had sharpened into a blade. Then Eleanor Whitmore stepped down onto Montana soil to meet the man everyone said she would destroy. Cole Barrett saw her before she saw him. He was leaning against a hitching post at the far end of the platform, arms crossed, hat pulled low, and the first thing he thought was, "God help me, they sent a China doll." She was slim and pale, dressed in gray silk that had cost more than his best steer. Her boots weren't made for mud. Her gloves weren't made for rope. She looked like she'd shatter the first time the wind came off the mountains. He'd expected exactly this, and still, somehow, it disappointed him. "Miss Whitmore," he said, stepping forward. She turned. Her eyes met his gray as slate, steady, unafraid, and something in her face made him pause. It wasn't fear. It wasn't excitement. It was the look of a woman measuring him. "Mr. Barrett," she said, "you're taller than the letters suggested." "The letters lied about a lot of things, I imagine," he said. "Yes," she answered. "I imagine they did." And there it was, a flicker of something underneath her calm gone before he could name it. He took her suitcase. It was heavier than he expected. "That all you brought?" he asked. "It's all I need." "Most brides bring a wagon's worth." "I'm not most brides." He almost smiled at that. Almost. The ride to the ranch took 2 hours, and for the first hour, neither of them said a word. Cole kept his eyes on the road. Eleanor kept hers on everything else. He noticed. Of course he noticed. A man learns to watch out on the frontier, and he watched her the way he'd watch a horse he didn't yet trust. She wasn't gaping at the mountains like the tourists who came through. She wasn't clutching her seat in terror at the ruts in the road. She was counting. Fences, cattle, water troughs, the way the pasture thinned and browned as they climbed. Her lips moved once silently, like she was doing arithmetic in her head. "You always this quiet?" he finally asked. "When I'm thinking." "And what are you thinking about?" She was quiet another moment. Then she said, "Your east pasture is overgrazed. Your fence line on the north ridge is failing, and you've got at least 40 head of cattle out there that should have been sold 2 months ago." Cole nearly dropped the reins. He turned and stared at her. "Excuse me?" I said, "I heard what you said." His voice had gone hard. "I'm asking how a woman who's been in Montana for 1 hour thinks she can tell me about my own land." She met his eyes without flinching. "I don't think it. I can see it." "You can see it. The east pasture grass is cropped down to the root. That's overgrazing. The cattle there have moved onto the ridge, which means your rotation's broken. And those steers by the creek." She nodded toward a distant huddle of brown. "Their frames are heavy. They've been fed past their prime. Every week you hold them, you lose money at market. You should have sold in July. Silence. The wagon creaked. A hawk cried somewhere overhead. Cole Barrett had been ranching this land for 11 years. His father had ranched it before him. And this pale, silk-wrapped city girl had just described in 90 seconds 3 problems he'd been losing sleep over for 3 months. He faced forward again. His jaw was tight. "You read that in a book," he said. "I read a great many things in books, Mr. Barrett. Books don't run a ranch." "No," she agreed softly. "But they tell you when one is dying." He didn't answer. He couldn't, because for the first time in his life, Cole Barrett didn't know what to make of the woman sitting beside him, and that unsettled him far more than any spoiled bride ever could. They arrived at Barrett Creek Ranch as the sun dropped low. Eleanor climbed down from the wagon before he could offer his hand. She stood in the yard, turning slowly, and Cole braced himself for the reaction he'd seen from every city person who'd ever visited the wrinkled nose, the disappointment. The "is this all?" It didn't come. Instead, she walked. Past the sagging barn, past the corral, past the woodpile and the smokehouse and the well. She ran one gloved finger along a fence rail and studied the splinters. She crouched, actually crouched in that expensive dress to look at the dirt. An old ranch hand named Silas came out of the barn, spat tobacco and squinted at her. "That the new missus?" he asked Cole. "That's her. She looking for something." "Damned if I know." Eleanor straightened, brushing dust from her hands. She walked back toward them, and there was a new light in her eyes now, sharp, alert, awake. "Mr. Barrett," she said, "how much are you paying for feed?" Silas choked on his tobacco. Cole blinked. "That's not exactly proper conversation for—" "How much?" Something in her tone stopped him. He named the figure. Eleanor went very still. "Say that again," she said quietly. He said it again, and for one heartbeat, Eleanor Whitmore forgot the plan. Forgot Boston. Forgot her stepbrother and the letters and the mission she'd been sent to complete. Because that number was so wrong, so badly wrong, that her whole body reacted before her mind could stop it. "You're being robbed," she said. "Now hold on. You are paying nearly double the market rate. Whoever supplies your feed is cheating you blind and has been, I'd guess, for years." She looked at the barn, the corral, the tired land. "That alone could be bleeding you $200 a season, maybe more." Silas looked at Cole. Cole looked at Eleanor. And the old ranch hand said very slowly, "Boss, the Boston lady might have a point." That night's supper was silent. Eleanor sat at the rough wooden table, a bowl of stew before her, and ate carefully, precisely, like a woman raised on manners she no longer believed in. Cole sat across from her. Silas had gone home to his cabin. The only sound was the fire and the wind. Finally, Cole set down his spoon. "Let's get some things straight," he said. "All right. I didn't want a mail-order bride. I didn't want a mail-order marriage." He hadn't expected that. He frowned. "Then why'd you come?" Eleanor's hand tightened almost imperceptibly around her spoon. "Because I was ordered to. Because I had no money, no choice, no name of my own. Because a man in Boston told me I'd sleep in the street if I refused." "I had my reasons," she said. "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I'll give you tonight." He studied her across the flickering light. She was a puzzle, this woman, soft as silk on the outside, hard as flint underneath. He couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. But then he supposed so was he. A struggling ranch, a mountain of debt, a dead father's dream he was one bad winter away from losing. "I'll be honest with you," he said. "This ranch is in trouble." "I know. You don't know how much." "Then tell me." And maybe it was the whiskey, or the loneliness, or the strange steadiness of her gray eyes. But Cole Barrett found himself telling this stranger the truth he'd never said aloud. "I owe money, a lot of it, to the bank in town and to some men I'd rather not name." He rubbed his face. "One more dry summer and I lose it all. My father's grave is on that ridge. My mother's beside him. and I am this close to losing the ground they're buried in." Eleanor went quiet. She thought of the letter sewn into her coat. Convince him to sell before winter. Make it look like his idea. When the ranch collapses, we buy everything. The land, the debt, the water rights he doesn't even know he's sitting on. She thought of how easy it would be. He was already drowning. All she had to do was hold his head under. "Mr. Barrett," she heard herself say instead, "bring me your account books." He looked up. "What?" "Your ledgers, your contracts, every scrap of paper that has a number on it. Bring them to me tonight." "Why?" "Because I think I can save your ranch," she said. "And I think I'm the only person alive who can." Cole laughed a short, disbelieving sound. "You," he said. "You've been here half a day." "Half a day was enough to find you a $200 leak in your feed budget," she replied. "Give me a week with your books and I'll find the rest." He stared at her. There was no arrogance in her face, no performance, just a quiet, absolute certainty that unnerved him more than boasting ever could. "You really think you can read my books better than I can," he said. "I don't think it, Mr. Barrett. I know it." She folded her hands. "My father was one of the wealthiest men in Boston. And before he died, he taught me everything: finance contracts, agriculture, livestock, debt, and the exact way desperate men lose everything they own without ever understanding why. I have spent 10 years learning what men like you never bother to learn until it's too late." 10 years, he repeated. 10 years of being told I was useless, she said. And for the first time, something raw broke through her calm. 10 years of being laughed at, overlooked, pushed into corners at dinner parties. 10 years of watching men half as clever run companies I could have run in my sleep because I was born a woman and a plain one at that. Her voice dropped. "So don't tell me what I can and can't read. I've read the whole of my life in the way people underestimated me. Your books will be easy by comparison." The fire cracked. Cole Barrett had heard a lot of speeches in his time. Men bragging in saloons, preachers thundering on Sundays, buyers bluffing at the cattle auction. He had never heard anything like this. Slowly, without a word, he stood. He crossed to a battered wooden chest in the corner, and he pulled out a stack of ledgers so worn and disorganized that Eleanor felt her fingers itch just looking at them. He set them on the table in front of her. "Knock yourself out," he said. She opened the first one, and within 30 seconds, her expression changed. "Mr. Barrett," she said slowly. "What?" She turned the ledger toward him and pointed to a line of figures. "Who prepared this water agreement?" He glanced at it. "My father signed that. Years back. Some deal with the neighboring spreads about the creek." "Why?" Eleanor didn't answer right away. She was reading. Her eyes moved down the page, then back up, then down again faster now, and Cole watched the color drain from her face. "Miss Whitmore, this agreement," she said carefully, "does it apply during drought?" "I suppose. Never really thought about it." "You need to think about it." She looked up at him, and her voice had gone very quiet and very serious. "Because unless I'm reading this wrong, and I am never wrong about a contract, this water agreement means that in a severe drought, you are legally required to give your creek water to the other ranches first, before your own cattle, before your own land." Cole went cold. "That can't be right." "It's right." She tapped the page. "Your father signed it in a wet year when water was plentiful, and it cost him nothing to be generous. But the clause has no end. In a bad drought, this contract could dry your pasture, kill your herd, and hand the survival of your ranch to your neighbors, while you watch your own creek flow past your dying cattle to save theirs." The silence in the room was total. Cole sank slowly into his chair. He'd known the ranch was in trouble. He'd known about the debt, the feed, the bad rotations. But this was a knife pressed against the throat of everything he had, and he'd been walking around for years without even feeling the blade. "How did you," he started, "see it in 5 minutes, because I know what to look for." Eleanor closed the ledger gently. "And because someone should have caught this a decade ago. The fact that no one did tells me everything I need to know about how this ranch has been run." "Careful," Cole said, but there was no heat in it, only exhaustion. "I'm not insulting you," she said softer now. "I'm telling you the truth. You are a good rancher, Mr. Barrett. You know cattle and land better than I ever will. But a ranch isn't just cattle and land. It's numbers, contracts, leverage. And in that world you've been fighting blindfolded against men who can see." He looked at her for a long time. "And you can see," he said. "Yes." "Then why?" he asked slowly. "Would a woman who could run companies in Boston agree to marry a broke Montana rancher she's never met?" And there it was again, that flicker behind her eyes. The secret. The letter in her coat. The truth she couldn't say. "Because they sent me to destroy you, Cole Barrett. Because everything I've just told you, I told you knowing I was supposed to use it against you, not for you." "Some questions," she said quietly, "don't have easy answers." Cole didn't push, but he filed it away, the pause, the shadow. The thing she wasn't saying, the way a careful man files away the sound of a floorboard creaking in an empty house. That night, Eleanor Whitmore lay awake in the small spare room Cole had given her, and she took out the letter. By the light of a single candle, she read her stepbrother's instructions again, though she knew them by heart. Gain his trust. Learn his weaknesses. When the moment is right, convince him the ranch is hopeless. Push him to sell. We've already spoken to the bank. The moment he defaults, we move. The water rights alone are worth 10 times the land. He doesn't know what he's sitting on. Keep it that way. And Eleanor, do not fail us. You know what happens if you do. You have nowhere else to go. No money that isn't ours. No name that isn't ours to take back. Remember your place. Remember your place. She had heard those words her whole life. The plain one. The quiet one. The clever one, which was worse than plain, because a clever woman is a threat, and a plain woman is only a disappointment. She had been both. Passed over for her prettier stepsisters. Cheated out of her inheritance by a stepbrother who forged their father's final papers while the old man's body was still warm. Threatened, cornered, and finally shipped across a continent like a weapon in a silk dress. And now they wanted her to finish it. To use everything her father had taught her. Everything good and true, and hers to destroy a man she'd known for a single day. Eleanor looked at the flame. She thought about Cole's face when she'd shown him the water agreement. Not anger. Not pride. Just the raw, exhausted grief of a man watching his family's grave slip out of his hands. His father is buried on that ridge, she thought, his mother beside him, and something in her, something that had been buried for 10 years under other people's contempt, stirred and woke and would not be quiet. She did not burn the letter that night, but she folded it very carefully and hid it in the false bottom of her suitcase and told herself she was only keeping her options open. She was lying. The next morning, before dawn, Eleanor was awake and dressed and sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by every ledger, contract, and receipt she could find. When Cole came in from the barn, hat in hand, he stopped dead in the doorway. She hadn't slept. He could see it in her face. And she'd been working. The papers were sorted into stacks, annotated in a small, precise hand, a fresh sheet covered in columns of figures at her elbow. "You been up all night?" he asked. "I've been finding your money," she said without looking up. "My what?" "Your money, Mr. Barrett. The money you've been losing. It's everywhere." She finally looked at him, and her eyes were bright with something he hadn't seen in her before. Not calculation now, but hunger. The pure joy of a mind finally allowed to do the thing it was built for. "Sit down. You're going to want to hear this." He sat. "First," she said, "the feed. I was right. You're paying near double. I found 3 suppliers within a day's ride who'd charge you far less. I've drafted letters to all 3. She slid a paper across. "Second, your cattle sales. You've been selling on the buyer's schedule, not yours. That's why you get low prices. They know you're desperate. If we hold the herd properly and sell into the right season, you could raise your income by 1/3, maybe more." Cole opened his mouth, closed it. "Third," she went on, Your grazing rotation is broken, which we discussed, and I've mapped out a new one that'll let your pasture recover and carry more cattle by spring. Fourth, she pulled another sheet. Your debts. They're bad, but they're not as hopeless as you think. 2 of your creditors are charging you interest that isn't even legal in this territory. I checked the statutes. We can challenge it. You checked the statutes, Cole said faintly. I checked the statutes. She set down the paper. And fifth. She paused. Fifth, Cole prompted. Eleanor's face changed. The brightness dimmed. Because this was the part that mattered. This was the part that would decide everything. The water agreement, she said. The one that could destroy you in a drought. What about it? I read it again, all night, every word. She leaned forward. Mr. Barrett, that clause has a flaw, a small one. The men who wrote it were clever, but they were greedy, and greedy men get sloppy. There's a way out of it, a legal way. But you have to move now before the drought comes, before anyone realizes what they signed. If you wait, it's too late. If you act now. Her voice dropped. You don't just escape the trap. You turn it around. That creek could become the single most valuable thing in this entire county. And it could belong to you. Cole stared at her. He didn't fully understand it, the legal language, the clauses, the leverage. But he understood her. He understood the certainty in her voice, the way she'd bent over those books all night with the focus of a surgeon, the way she'd walked his ruined land and read it like scripture. Miss Whitmore, he said slowly. Yesterday I thought they sent me a useless bride. I know what you thought. I was wrong. Something crossed her face, quick, complicated, almost like pain. You have no idea how wrong, she said quietly. He didn't catch the second meaning. She hadn't meant him to. Over the next few days, everything began to change. Eleanor worked from before dawn until long after dark. She rewrote the feed contracts. She sent the letters. She drew up a new grazing plan that had Silas scratching his head, then nodding, then telling Cole in private. Boss, I don't know where you found her, but don't let her leave. She rode out to the pastures herself clumsily, at first gripping the saddle like it might buck her off, refusing every offer of help, and she counted the cattle again, and this time she was right to the head. She inspected the failing fence on the north ridge and calculated exactly how much it would cost to fix versus how much it was costing to leave broken. The ranch hands started calling her the Missus without the sneer they'd started with, and Cole Barrett found himself against every instinct beginning to hope. But every few days a letter came from Boston. Eleanor learned to watch for the mail rider before Cole did. She learned to take the letters quietly, to slip them into her apron before anyone saw the Boston postmark. And she learned to read them alone, with her jaw tight and her stomach cold. Progress report. Has he begun to consider selling? The bank grows impatient. You have until the first snow. Do not make us send someone to finish what you cannot. Each letter was worse than the last. Each one reminded her exactly who she was, where she came from, and what she'd been sent to do. And each one she hid. One evening, nearly 2 weeks in, Cole found her on the porch, staring out at the darkening ridge where his parents were buried. You look troubled, he said, settling into the chair beside her. Just thinking. You do a dangerous amount of that. The corner of her mouth lifted. It was the first time he'd made her almost smile, and he found he liked it more than he expected. Can I ask you something? She said. Ask. Why do you stay? She nodded toward the ranch. The debt, the whole exhausting weight of it. You could sell. Walk away. Start fresh somewhere the land isn't fighting you. Why hold on to something that's bleeding you dry? Cole was quiet a long moment. See that ridge? He said finally. I see it. My father broke this land with his own 2 hands, dug the first well, set the first post. My mother buried 3 babies before I came along, and every one of them is up there under those pines. His voice roughened. My father used to say, a man doesn't own land, Cole. The land owns him, and you don't abandon what owns you. He looked out at the ridge. So I stay, even when it's stupid, even when it's killing me. because leaving would be like leaving them. Eleanor said nothing, but inside something broke, because she was sitting beside a man who would rather die than sell his land, and she had been sent specifically precisely to make him sell it. To take that ridge, that grave, those 3 lost babies under the pines. Her stepbrother didn't want the ranch. He wanted to salt the earth of a dead man's dream, and he'd sent her to do it with a smile. "Mr. Barrett," she said, and her voice was not quite steady. "Cole," he corrected gently. "I think you've earned my Christian name by now." "Cole." She turned to look at him. "If someone was trying to take this land from you not honestly, but through tricks, through the debt, through the contracts, would you fight them?" His face hardened. "To my last breath. Even if you didn't understand how they were doing it. Especially then. Then you need someone who does understand," she said. "You need someone who can see the traps before you step in them. Someone who knows the game as well as they do." Cole studied her in the dying light. "Are you offering to be that someone?" he asked. And Eleanor Whitmore sent to destroy him, ordered to ruin him, threatened and cornered and shipped west like a loaded gun, looked at this weary, honorable man defending his parents' graves and made a choice. She had not known she was going to make until the words were already leaving her mouth. "Yes," she said. "I am." She meant it. God help her, she meant it, and she had never in her life said anything she meant more. Later that night, alone in her room, Eleanor took her stepbrother's latest letter from her apron. She read it one more time. "Do not make us send someone to finish what you cannot." Then she held the corner to the candle flame, but she stopped. Her hand trembled an inch from the fire, and she pulled it back. "Not yet," she told herself. "If I burn them, I have no proof, no evidence, nothing to protect Cole with when they come, and they will come." She smoothed the letter flat. A wise man keeps his enemy's weapons where he can find them. So instead of burning it, she added it to the growing bundle in the false bottom of her suitcase. Every letter, every instruction, every threat in her stepbrother's own hand. She didn't fully understand yet what she was building, but her father's voice was in her head the way it always was in the important moments. Evidence, Eleanor. In the end, everything comes down to who can prove what. Keep the proof. Guard it with your life. And when the moment comes, don't hesitate. "I won't, Papa," she whispered to the empty room. "I promise you, I won't hesitate." She blew out the candle. The next morning, everything nearly fell apart. Cole came in from town with a face like a thundercloud, threw his hat on the table, and said, "The bank moved up my payment." Eleanor looked up sharply. "What?" 60 days early. Said there's been a... He spat the word, reassessment of my account. If I don't pay by the end of the month, they call the whole loan. Everything. All at once. He braced his hands on the table, head down. "There's no way, Eleanor. No way I raise that kind of money in a month. It's over." Eleanor stood very slowly. 60 days early. A reassessment. Right after I arrived. She knew exactly what it was. It was her stepbrother tightening the noose, punishing her for taking too long, reminding her that if she wouldn't destroy Cole gently, they would do it themselves and let her watch. "Do not make us send someone to finish what you cannot." They'd sent someone. They'd sent the bank. "Cole," she said carefully, "look at me." He looked up. He looked for the first time since she'd met him defeated. "Who owns the bank?" she asked. "What, the bank in town? Who owns it? Not the manager, the men behind it, the money behind the money." "I don't some group out east, I think. Investors. Why does that matter?" "Because I know who they are." Eleanor didn't say. "Because I could recite their names in my sleep. Because they eat dinner at my stepbrother's table." "It matters," she said aloud, "because banks don't move payments up 60 days for no reason. Someone leaned on them. Someone wants you to default now, before winter, before you've recovered." She was already moving gathering ledgers, pulling out the contracts. "Which means someone wants this land badly enough to break the rules to get it. And Cole?" She looked up at him, and her gray eyes had gone hard as iron. Men who break rules leave evidence. Always. And I am very, very good at finding it. He stared at her, this whirlwind of a woman flinging herself into battle for a ranch that wasn't even hers. "Why do you care so much?" he asked, honestly bewildered. "This isn't your land. This isn't your family. 2 weeks ago you'd never even heard my name. Why are you fighting like this is your fight?" Eleanor froze. The question hung in the air. Because it is my fight, she thought. Because the men trying to destroy you are the same men who destroyed me. Because for the first time in my life, I found a place that feels like it could be mine, and a man who looks at me like I'm worth something, and I would rather burn Boston to the ground than let them take it. But she couldn't say that. Not yet. Not without telling him everything, the letters, the plot, the fact that she'd arrived as his enemy. So she said the only true thing she could. "Because someone spent my whole life telling me I was useless," she said quietly. "And I've decided I'm finished believing them." She held his eyes. "This is where I stop being what they made me. Right here. With you. On this ranch. Whether you understand it or not." Cole Barrett didn't understand it. Not all of it. Not yet. But he understood enough to cross the kitchen and put his hand over hers where it rested on the ledgers and say the words that would change both their lives. "Then let's fight," he said, "together." And Eleanor Whitmore, the useless bride, the plain daughter, the weapon in a silk dress, felt his rough hand close over hers and knew with absolute certainty that she had just chosen a side. She had chosen wrong by every measure Boston would use. She had chosen a broke rancher over her own family, a dying ranch over her own safety, a stranger over the people who held her name and her money and her whole future in their fists. And she had never in 25 years of being told exactly who she was felt more completely like herself. That night, she wrote her own letter. Not to Boston. To a lawyer, an old friend of her father's, one of the few honest men she'd ever known, a man her stepbrother didn't know existed. "I need everything you have on the Whitmore family holdings," she wrote. "Every contract, every hidden clause, every fraud if there's fraud to find, and there is. I've decided to stop being their instrument. I've decided to become their reckoning. Send it quietly. Trust no one. And Mr. Hartley, hurry." She sealed it. She addressed it in a hand no one at the ranch would recognize. And in the morning, she would ride to town herself and post it where no one from Boston could intercept it. The war had begun. Only one side knew it yet. Eleanor set down her pen. She looked out the small window at the dark ridge, where two people she'd never met lay buried beneath the pines guarding a creek worth more than all of Boston knew. "I'm going to save it," she whispered. "Your land, your son, all of it." The candle guttered, and somewhere out in the Montana dark on land, everyone said a useless woman would destroy Eleanor. Whitmore rolled up her sleeves and began quietly and completely to build. The ride to town at dawn was the longest of Eleanor's life. She kept Cole's second-best horse at a steady walk. Her father's lawyer's letter tucked against her chest, and she watched the road behind her the whole way. Because a woman who has spent her life being watched learns eventually to watch back. And she had the cold, certain feeling that somewhere between the ranch and the telegraph office, someone was going to try to stop her. She was right. He was waiting outside the general store, a thin man in an Eastern suit, out of place in a town of dust and denim, leaning against a post like he'd been there for hours. Eleanor knew the type before she knew the man. Boston sent them by the dozen. Men who did quiet work for quiet money. "Mrs. Barrett," he said, tipping his hat as she dismounted. "Or is it still Miss Whitmore in your heart?" Eleanor did not slow down. "I don't believe we've met. We haven't. But your stepbrother sends his regards, and his concern." The man fell into step beside her. "He's worried about you out here, all alone, married to a man who's about to lose everything. He wanted me to remind you of your obligations." "How thoughtful." "He also wanted me to collect any correspondence you might be sending east." The man's voice stayed pleasant. "He likes to know his sister's thoughts are reaching the right people. I'd be happy to carry anything to the telegraph office for you." There it was. They wanted her mail. They wanted to know who she was writing to and why, and whether the useless bride had begun to slip the leash. Eleanor stopped walking. She turned and looked the man full in the face, and she smiled a small, cool Boston smile she'd learned at 100 dinner parties where men like this had underestimated her. "You can tell my stepbrother," she said, "that I am attending to my obligations with great care. And you can tell him that the only correspondence I'm sending today is a grocery order." She patted her chest, where the real letter lay hidden beneath a folded list of flour and sugar and coffee. "Now, if you'll excuse me, my husband is waiting on his supplies." The man's eyes narrowed just slightly. "He's not much of a husband," he said softly. "A broke rancher on borrowed land. You could do better, Miss Whitmore. You were always meant for better. Come home, and all of this can be forgotten." For half a heartbeat, Eleanor let him see something in her face, a flicker of the old fear, the old obedience, the trained flinch of a woman who'd been told her whole life to remember her place. Then she let it die. "I am home," she said. "Good day." And she walked into the store, and she posted her real letter to Mr. Hartley through the back clerk with a coin and a whisper, and she bought her flour and her sugar and her coffee, and she rode back to Barrett Creek with her spine straight and her hands steady, knowing she had just told her family's man to his face that she would not be coming home. She didn't tell Cole about the man. Not yet. There was too much he didn't know, and she couldn't explain one piece without explaining all of it. But she rode faster on the way back. The clock was running now. She could feel it. The next 3 weeks were a war fought entirely with paper and grit. Eleanor turned the ranch's crumbling kitchen into a command post. She woke before the roosters and worked past the coyotes. She wrote to the 3 cheaper feed suppliers, and when the first 2 came back with polite refusals, spooked, she suspected by someone in Boston, reaching out ahead of her, she wrote to the 3rd with an offer so clever it couldn't be refused. She promised him not just the ranch's business, but a testimonial, a reference to every rancher in the county, if he'd cut his price and deliver on credit through the winter. He said yes. The day the first cheap feed wagon rolled into the yard, Silas took off his hat and stared at it like it was a ghost. "Boss," he said to Cole, "you know what she just saved us on feed alone." "Tell me." "More than I make in a year." The old man shook his head. "That woman's worth 10 hands. Cole watched Eleanor directing the delivery, checking every sack against her ledger, catching the driver trying to short them 2 bags, and calling it out before the man could finish unloading. "I know," he said quietly. "Believe me, I know." But saving money on feed was the easy part. The debt was the throat of it. The bank had moved his payment up 60 days, and no amount of clever bookkeeping could conjure that much cash out of a struggling ranch in a month. So Eleanor did the only thing she could. She went after the interest. "Cole," she said one night, spreading 3 loan documents across the table. "I told you 2 of your creditors are charging you illegal rates. I've checked the territorial statutes 3 times now. I'm certain. The Denning loan and the Hollis loan, both of them are charging interest above the legal ceiling. That makes the contracts void, not renegotiable, void." He frowned at the papers. "Meaning what?" "Meaning you may not owe them what you think you owe them. Meaning if we challenge these in front of a judge and win, your total debt could drop by nearly 1/3 overnight." She leaned forward. "It won't clear the bank loan, but it buys us room. It buys us time. And right now time is the only thing standing between you and losing this ranch." Cole looked at the documents, then at her. "And if we challenge them and lose, we won't." "Eleanor, we won't lose," she repeated, "because I'm right, and because I have something better than Hope Cole. I have the statute chapter and verse, and a witness. The county recorder himself signed a note on the Denning loan, flagging the rate as questionable 3 years ago. He was ignored, but his note is still in the record. I found it." She tapped the paper. "We don't gamble. We win with evidence. That's the only way I know how to fight." He was quiet for a long moment, staring at this woman who kept turning up weapons in places he'd never think to look. "Where were you?" he said finally. My whole life. Boston, she said. Being told I was useless. They were fools. Yes, she agreed. They were. And she did not smile because the fools in question were coming for both of them, and she knew it, and he didn't. They filed the challenge on the Denning and Hollis loans the following week. It was Eleanor who wrote every word of the petition, though she signed it in Cole's name. A woman couldn't file such a thing in the territory, not without a fight she didn't have time for. It was Eleanor who cited the statute, attached the recorder's forgotten note, laid out the illegal rates in columns so clean and damning that the county judge would have to be blind to miss them. And it was Eleanor who sat in the back of the courtroom veiled and silent, while Cole stood before the judge and spoke the words she'd written on a card in his pocket. Denning's lawyer bluster. Hollis didn't even show. And the judge, a leathery old man named Pruitt, who'd seen every kind of frontier swindle there was, read the petition, read the statute, read the recorder's note, and then took off his spectacles and looked at Cole Barrett with something like respect. Mr. Barrett, he said, this is the finest argued petition I've seen come out of a ranch in 20 years. Did you write this yourself? Cole opened his mouth. From the back of the room, Eleanor held her breath. No, Your Honor, Cole said. My wife wrote it, every word. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Judge Pruitt raised his eyebrows and looked toward the back where a veiled woman sat very still. Well, he said dryly, then your wife knows the law of this territory better than half the men who practice it. He struck the papers with his pen. Petition granted. The Denning and Hollis loans are void as usurious. Mr. Barrett, you owe these men nothing further. Court's adjourned. The gavel fell. And just like that, in the space of a single morning, Cole Barrett's debt dropped by nearly a third, and Eleanor Whitmore, veiled and silent in the back of a Montana courtroom, had won the first battle of a war her enemies didn't yet know had started. Outside in the sunlight, Cole didn't say a word until they were alone by the wagon. Then he took off his hat and turned to her and just looked at her. You did that? He said. You cut my debt in half, a room full of men, and you never said a word. You let me stand up there and take the credit for your work. That's how it has to be, Eleanor said simply. A woman's argument carries further from a man's mouth. My father taught me that. It made me furious for years. She lifted the veil back from her face. Now I just use it. It's not right. No, she agreed. It isn't. But it's true. And I don't have time to fix the whole world, Cole. I only have time to save your ranch. She climbed up into the wagon. One battle at a time. He stood there a moment longer looking up at her. Eleanor, he said. Whatever you came here to do. He shook his head. Whatever your reasons were that first day when you wouldn't tell me why a Boston woman married a broke cowboy. He paused. I don't care anymore. You hear me, whatever it was. It doesn't matter. Because no one who is out to do me harm fights this hard to save me. Eleanor's hands went still on the reins. Because he was wrong. Because she had been out to do him harm. Because the woman he was praising had arrived at his door as his executioner with instructions sewn into her coat and a plan to salt his father's grave. And the only thing that had changed was her. Cole, she said, and her voice wasn't quite steady. There's something I need to tell you. Something about why Boss. Silas came pounding down the road on a lathered horse, and the look on his face killed the confession in Eleanor's throat. Boss, you gotta come quick, the old man gasped, hauling his horse to a stop. It's the creek. Somebody's up on the north end and they got a crew and they're digging. They're digging a diversion. They're trying to turn the water off your land. Cole's face went white. That's not possible, he said. Nobody has the right. The water agreement, Eleanor said, and her stomach dropped through the wagon floor. Cole, the water agreement your father signed. Someone's invoking it. Someone's claiming their share of the creek, and they're taking it now, while your pasture's still recovering, while the herd's rebuilding at the worst possible moment. She was already gathering the reins. This isn't a coincidence. This is an attack. Someone timed this. Because of course someone had. Because somewhere in Boston, a thin man in an Eastern suit had ridden back and reported that Eleanor Whitmore would not be coming home, and her stepbrother had decided to stop waiting for her and start the destruction himself. They rode for the north end of the creek at a dead gallop. What they found was worse than Silas had described. A crew of 8 men hired diggers by the look of them, cutting a channel to divert the creek onto the neighboring Caldwell spread. And standing at the head of it, supervising, was a lawyer Eleanor didn't recognize, but whose Eastern suit and Boston polish she'd have known anywhere. Cole was off his horse before it fully stopped. "Get off my land," he said. "Right now, every one of you." The lawyer turned unhurried and produced a document from his coat. "Mr. Barrett," he said, "I represent the Caldwell interests who have recently through certain investors acquired the neighboring water rights. Per the agreement your late father signed in 1879, the Caldwell spread is entitled to its share of Barrett Creek during periods of scarcity, and I'm afraid this year's dry conditions qualify." He smiled. "We're simply collecting what's legally ours. You're welcome to consult a lawyer, though I understand you can barely afford your own supper." Cole's hand dropped toward his hip. "Cole?" Eleanor's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Don't. That's what they want. A rancher who threatens a lawyer over water, that's the story they'll tell the judge. Don't give it to them." Cole froze. The Boston lawyer's smile widened. "Listen to your wife, Mr. Barrett. She has excellent instincts." He looked at Eleanor for the first time, and his eyes flickered with recognition. "Miss Whitmore. Or should I say, Mrs. Barrett. Your brother did mention you'd developed complications. What a pity. You could have been on the winning side of this." Every hired digger was watching now. Cole was watching. Silas was watching. And Eleanor understood with perfect clarity that this was the moment. This was where they'd forced her hand. Choose Boston and betray the man beside her. Choose Cole and declare war on her own family in front of witnesses with no way back. She looked at the diversion channel cutting into Cole's land. She looked at the smug Boston lawyer, and she made her choice out loud so there could be no mistaking it. "That agreement," she said, "is void." The lawyer's smile flickered. "I beg your pardon. You heard me." Eleanor stepped forward. "The 1879 water agreement. It's void, and I can prove it right now in front of every man here." She turned to the diggers. "You men, do you have written contracts for this work signed and dated?" The lead digger, confused, nodded slowly. "Of course we do." "Then you'll want to keep them," Eleanor said. "Because when this agreement is thrown out, and it will be the man who hired you illegally is going to owe you every dollar, and you'll need proof of what you were hired to do. Guard those contracts. They're worth more than your wages." The diggers exchanged glances. The lawyer's face began to change. "Mrs. Barrett," he said, "you're bluffing. That agreement has stood for 7 years. It stood because no one who understood it ever read it." Eleanor shot back. "But I read it. All night 3 weeks ago by candlelight. And I found the flaw your greedy predecessors left in it." She took another step. "The agreement grants water rights during periods of scarcity. But it never defines scarcity. It leaves that to a mutual determination by both parties. It requires agreement. And Cole Barrett," she pointed at him, "the man who owns half of that clause has not agreed to anything. You cannot invoke a mutual agreement unilaterally. It's written right into the document. Section 4. You want to divert this creek. You need his signature, and you are never ever going to get it." Dead silence. The Boston lawyer stared at her. He pulled the agreement from his coat again, and his eyes dropped to it, scanning faster now, and Eleanor watched the exact moment he found Section 4 and realized she was right. That's a technicality," he said. "That's the law," Eleanor said. "The whole of it. The technicalities are all there is." She turned to the diggers. "Gentlemen, you're standing on Barrett land cutting an illegal channel under a void contract. Every shovel of dirt you move is trespass and property damage, and Mr. Barrett here would be within his rights to charge you all. Now I'd suggest you fill in what you've dug and go home and send your bill to the man who lied to you about having the right to be here." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then the lead digger looked at the sweating Boston lawyer, looked at the void contract in his hand, looked at the tall, furious rancher, and the iron-eyed woman who'd just recited property law like scripture and made the only smart choice a working man could make. "Boys," he said, "fill it in. We're done here." The lawyer's mouth fell open. "You can't. I'm paying you." "You can pay us to fill it back in," the digger said, "but we ain't going to jail for a piece of paper this lady says is worthless. And something tells me the lady knows." Within the hour, the channel was filled, the crew was gone, and the Boston lawyer was climbing into his buggy with the look of a man who'd been sent to win an easy fight and was going to have to explain a humiliating loss. He paused before he drove off. He looked at Eleanor. "Your brother," he said, "underestimated you." "Everyone does," Eleanor said. "It's the last mistake most of them make." The lawyer drove off, and Eleanor Whitmore stood on the banks of Barrett Creek with the water flowing free and untouched across land she'd been sent to destroy, and she realized her hands were shaking, not with fear, but with something she had almost no experience of. Victory. Real victory. Hers. Cole came to stand beside her. For a long moment he didn't speak. Then he said very quietly, "You knew that lawyer." Eleanor's breath caught. "He knew you," Cole went on, still staring at the creek. "He called you Miss Whitmore before you told him your name. He said your brother mentioned complications, and you didn't correct him." He turned to face her. "Eleanor, what haven't you told me?" And there it was. The moment she'd been running from since the day she stepped off the train. She could lie. She was good at lying. She'd been raised in a house that ran on it. She could deflect delay, tell him just enough to explain the lawyer, and nothing more. But she looked at Cole Barrett, at the man who'd stood up in a courtroom and given her the credit, who'd said, "Whatever you came here to do, I don't care." And she found she couldn't do it. She couldn't lie to the first person in her life who'd looked at her like she was worth something. "Cole," she said, "I need you to listen to all of it before you say anything. Can you do that?" His jaw tightened. "Tell me. I didn't come here by choice." The words came out steady, even though her heart was hammering. "My stepbrother arranged this marriage. He forged my father's inheritance papers after Papa died, took everything, and left me with nothing but a name I couldn't even use to defend myself. I had no money, no home, nothing but what he allowed me." She made herself hold his eyes. "And then he found out about you, about this ranch, about the water rights your father signed away for nothing that are worth more than anyone out here knows." Cole went very still. "He sent me here," Eleanor said, "to destroy you." The words hung in the air between them. "The instructions were sewn into my coat," she went on, her voice barely holding. "Gain your trust, learn your weaknesses, convince you the ranch was hopeless, push you to sell. The bank was already in his pocket, that's why they moved your payment up. And once you defaulted, once you were broke and beaten and desperate, his men would buy everything. The land, the debt, the creek, your father's grave." She was shaking now openly. "That's who they sent to marry you, Cole. Not a bride, a wrecking crew in a silk dress. That's what I was." For a long, terrible moment, Cole Barrett said nothing at all. His face had gone hard and unreadable, and Eleanor braced herself for the rage, the disgust, the shove out the door she knew she deserved. "Was," he said finally. Eleanor blinked. "What? You said that's what you was." His voice was rough. "Past tense, so finish it. What are you now?" And Eleanor Whitmore, who had defended herself against a Boston lawyer without a tremor an hour ago, felt tears sting her eyes for the first time in years. "Now," she said, "I'm the woman trying to save you. Everything I've done since the second week, the feed, the debt, the courtroom, that creek right there, every bit of it I've done to protect you from the exact plan I was sent to carry out. I stopped being their weapon, Cole. I burned nothing because I need the proof, but I've been building a case against my own family since the night you told me about your parents on that ridge. I chose you. 3 weeks ago on the porch, I chose you, and I've been choosing you every single day since, and I was too much of a coward to tell you why. Silence. The creek ran on. A hawk cried somewhere up the ridge. "Say something," Eleanor whispered. "Please." Cole looked at her for a long, long time. "The night you showed me that water agreement," he said slowly. 3 weeks ago. The one that could have killed my ranch in a drought. You could have just let me sign away the escape. You could have sat on that flaw, kept quiet, let them use it today when they came." His eyes searched her face. "But instead you found the way out and handed it to me. You armed me against your own people before I even knew there was a war." "Yes," Eleanor said. "Why?" "Because you were kind to me," she said simply. "Because you gave me a room and a purpose, and you listened when I spoke, which no one has done since my father died. Because you defend the graves of people you loved instead of selling them, and I have spent my whole life among people who'd sell anything. Because—" her voice cracked. "Because you're a good man, Cole Barrett, and I have met so few of them, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't destroy you. I'd rather destroy them." Cole Barrett took a slow breath. Then he did something Eleanor did not expect. He reached out and took both her shaking hands in his and held them until they stilled. "Then we've got a problem," he said quietly. "I know. No, not the problem you think." He shook his head. "The problem is that your family isn't going to stop. That lawyer's going to ride back east and tell them you've turned on them. And men who forge a dead man's papers, who buy banks and hire diggers and send a wife to destroy a husband, men like that don't lose gracefully. They're going to come at us with everything they have. And Eleanor," his grip tightened, "it's not just my ranch anymore. Now it's you. You've made yourself their enemy. They're going to want to bury you too." Eleanor looked up at him. "Let them try," she said. "You're not scared." "I've been scared my whole life," she said. "I'm done with it." She turned her hands in his so that now she was gripping him. "Cole, I know these people. I know how they think, how they cheat, where they hide their crimes. My stepbrother's whole fortune is built on forgery and fraud, and I can prove it. I've written to my father's old lawyer, an honest man named Hartley, and he's gathering everything. When they come at us, they won't be facing a broke rancher and a useless bride. They'll be facing a case that can put my stepbrother in prison and take back everything he stole, including your creek, including my inheritance." Cole stared at her. "You've been planning this," he said, "this whole time. While you were saving my feed budget and cutting my debt, you were building a trap," Eleanor said. "Yes, the same kind they sent me to build for you, except I'm building it for them." Her eyes were bright and hard and utterly alive. "They called me useless Cole. They spent 10 years teaching me exactly how they cheat and steal and destroy. And now I'm going to use every single thing they taught me to bring the whole rotten house down on their heads." For the first time since she'd confessed, Cole Barrett smiled. It was a slow, dangerous, admiring smile. "You know," he said, "when they told me they were sending a useless bride to ruin my ranch. I remember. I've never in my life been so glad somebody lied to me." Eleanor laughed. It burst out of her, surprised and unguarded, the first real laugh she could remember in years, and it startled a smile onto her own face that made Cole's breath catch. But the laughter faded quickly, because they both knew what was coming. "How long do we have?" Cole asked. "Before they come for real." Eleanor thought about the Boston lawyer's face as he drove off, the report he'd carry east, the fury it would spark. "Not long," she said. "A month maybe. Long enough for that lawyer to reach Boston and for my stepbrother to lose his temper. He'll come himself, I think. He won't trust anyone else with something this personal. He'll come with lawyers and false contracts and every trick he can carry, and he'll try to seize this ranch and silence me in one stroke." She looked up at the ridge, at the pines, at the graves. "So we have a month to get ready, to finish gathering the proof, to make sure that when he walks onto this land, thinking he's won, he's walking into your trap instead," Cole finished. "Into our trap," Eleanor corrected. "I don't fight alone anymore. I learned that this month too." Cole squeezed her hands one last time, then let them go. "All right, Mrs. Barrett," he said. And this time the name didn't sound like an accident of a forced marriage. It sounded like a fact he was choosing. "Tell me what you need. Tell me everything. And let's get to work." And so they did. That night, and every night after, the kitchen at Barrett Creek became something more than a command post. It became a war room. Eleanor spread out everything: the letters she'd hidden, the void loan documents, the water agreement, the notes she'd made on her stepbrother's methods over 10 years of being ignored at his table. She wrote to Mr. Hartley twice a week in code, and Hartley wrote back with pieces of a picture that grew darker and more damning with every letter. The forged inheritance papers. She'd suspected. Hartley confirmed it. He'd found the original will filed and forgotten in a probate office. Her stepbrother had assumed no one would ever check. The real will left Eleanor a full third of the Whitmore fortune. Her stepbrother had forged a replacement and buried the truth. The bank. Hartley traced the investors who'd leaned on the Montana bank straight back to companies her stepbrother secretly controlled. The Caldwell water rights. Purchased 2 months before Eleanor ever arrived through a shell company by the same hidden hand. Every thread led back to the same man. And Eleanor, patient and precise and utterly relentless, gathered every thread and began to weave them into a rope. He made one mistake, she told Cole late one night, both of them exhausted, the lamp burning low. The same mistake he's always made. He never once imagined I might fight back. In his whole life it never crossed his mind that the useless girl at the end of the table was memorizing everything, watching, learning, waiting. She set down her pen. He built his entire fortune assuming I'd never dare. And now that assumption is going to destroy him. Cole watched her across the lamplight. The fierce, brilliant, transformed woman who'd stepped off a train 6 weeks ago, looking like she'd shatter in the wind. "You've changed," he said, "since you got here. You know that." "No," Eleanor said quietly. "I haven't changed at all. This is who I always was. I just finally live somewhere I'm allowed to be it." She looked up at him and her voice softened. "You did that, Cole. You gave me the first place in my whole life where being clever wasn't a crime, where being useful wasn't a threat. I don't know how to thank you for that." "You've thanked me plenty," Cole said gruffly. "You saved my ranch." "Not yet," Eleanor said. "Not until he's beaten. Not until the trap is sprung and the truth comes out and there's nothing left of his lies to touch us." She gathered the papers into their careful stacks. "But we're close, Cole. We're so close I can taste it. A few more weeks. Hartley sends the last of the evidence. We make our final preparations. And then—" She stopped, because outside, faint but unmistakable in the still Montana night, came the sound of a horse. A single rider coming up the road to the ranch at an hour when no honest man traveled. Cole was on his feet in an instant, reaching for the rifle by the door. Eleanor blew out the lamp. In the sudden darkness, they both stood frozen, listening as the hoofbeats drew closer and closer, and finally stopped in the yard, and a voice called out into the night. A voice Eleanor knew, a voice she had prayed she wouldn't hear for at least another month. "Eleanor." Her stepbrother called, pleasant and cold and close. "Sister, I know you're in there. Why don't you come out and we'll settle this like family?" He hadn't waited a month. He'd come early, and in the dark of the kitchen, her hand finding Cole's in the blackness and gripping it tight. Eleanor Whitmore understood that the war she'd spent 6 weeks preparing for had just arrived at her door before she was ready, and that everything now depended on whether the trap she'd built was already strong enough to spring. For a long moment, neither of them moved. In the darkness of the kitchen, Eleanor's grip on Cole's hand tightened until her knuckles ached. Outside, the pleasant, cold voice called again. "Eleanor, I've come a very long way. Don't be rude." She felt Cole shift beside her, felt him raise the rifle, and she pressed her free hand flat against his chest. "No," she whispered. "That's exactly what he wants. A shot fired in the dark, a rancher who ambushes a visitor. He'd own you by morning." Her mind was racing, sorting, calculating even now. "He came early because he wants to catch us unprepared. So we can't act unprepared. We act like we've been waiting for him. We act like this is our ground and our terms." "Is it?" Cole breathed. "Are we ready?" Eleanor thought of the papers stacked in the war room. Hartley's evidence, most of it, but not all. The forged will confirmed, but not yet in her hands. The bank trail traced, but not yet notarized. She was close. She was so close. But close was not finished, and her stepbrother had never in his life given anyone the courtesy of a fair fight. "No," she admitted. "But he doesn't know that. And a man who thinks he's already won gets careless, so we let him think it." She squeezed Cole's hand one last time, then let go. "Light the lamp," she said. "Both lamps. Every light in the house. Let him see we're not afraid of the dark." She smoothed her skirts in the blackness, straightened her spine, lifted her chin. "And Cole, no matter what he says, no matter what he offers, no matter how he tries to turn you against me, you say nothing. Do you understand? Not one word. Let me handle my brother. I've been handling him my whole life." The lamp flared to life. Cole's face swam up out of the dark, tense and furious and trusting. "I've got your back," he said. "Whatever happens in there." "I know," Eleanor said. And she found to her surprise that she did know it completely, and that the knowing steadied her more than anything else could have. "That's the only reason I'm not afraid." She opened the door. Julian Whitmore stood in the yard, still mounted one gloved hand, resting easy on the pommel, smiling up at her like a man arriving at a garden party. He was handsome, in the cold way she'd always hated every hair in place, every button gleaming, a man who'd never once in his life gone without, and never once earned what he had. "There she is," he said warmly. "My little sister. You look well, Eleanor. Country life agrees with you." "Julian?" Her voice came out steady. "You're a long way from home. You're my home sister. Family always is." He swung down from the horse unhurried, and behind him 2 more riders emerged from the dark, a lawyer in an Eastern suit, and a heavy-set man Eleanor recognized as one of Julian's hired enforcers, the kind who did the work that couldn't be written down. "I came the moment I heard you were in distress, married to a bankrupt, living in a hovel, tangled up in a man's ruin." He clicked his tongue. "I've come to bring you home, Eleanor. All is forgiven. We'll sort out this unfortunate marriage and put it behind us." "I'm not in distress," Eleanor said, "and I'm not coming home." Julian's smile didn't move, but something flickered behind his eyes. "Now, Eleanor, you didn't come for me, Julian." She stepped out onto the porch, letting the lamplight fall full on her face, letting him see there was nothing left in it of the frightened girl he'd shipped west. "You came for the ranch, for the water rights. You came because your man rode back to Boston and told you your useless little sister had turned on you and you couldn't stand it. So don't stand in my husband's yard and pretend this is love. We both know exactly what you are." The silence stretched. Then Julian laughed, a short, genuine laugh, the first honest thing he'd done since he arrived. "My God," he said. "You really have grown a spine out here. How novel." He handed his reins to the enforcer and stepped closer, lowering his voice to something intimate and vicious. "Fine, no pretense. You want the truth, sister? Here it is. This ranch is going to be mine. The water rights are going to be mine. And you," his eyes flicked over her, "are going to help me take it, or you're going to be ruined right alongside your cowboy. Because I hold your money, Eleanor. Every cent you have runs through me. I can make you a pauper by breakfast. You'll have nothing. Nothing but a bankrupt husband and a pile of dirt with graves in it." Eleanor felt Cole go rigid behind her. She did not turn around. "You forged Papa's will," she said quietly. Julian went very still. "You forged it," she went on, "the week he died. You took my third of the estate and you buried the real will in a probate office. You were too arrogant to think anyone would ever check. You've spent 10 years spending money that belongs to me, Julian. And you've spent it so freely, so carelessly, so certain I'd never dare come after it, that you've left a trail a blind man could follow." The lawyer beside Julian shifted uncomfortably. Julian's jaw had gone tight. "You can't prove that." "Can't I?" "There is no proof," he said, but his voice had changed, and Eleanor heard it, the first hairline crack. Whatever you think you know, whatever fantasy you've built out here in the mud, you have nothing. A woman's word against mine. In what court, Eleanor? What judge takes the word of a hysterical wife over a Whitmore? And there it was. The arrogance. The exact arrogance she'd been counting on for 6 weeks. The absolute certainty that she was still what he'd always believed her to be. Powerless. Penniless. A woman whose word meant nothing. Eleanor smiled. "You should come inside, Julian," she said. "You've ridden a long way. Let me show you my hovel." She turned and walked back into the house, and after a moment, unable to help himself, curious and contemptuous, and certain of his own victory, Julian Whitmore followed her in. The lawyer came too. The enforcer waited by the door, and Cole stationed himself across from the man, rifle down, but ready, 2 silent guards watching each other. Eleanor led her brother to the kitchen, to the long table, and she watched his eyes flick over the papers stacked there without understanding what he was looking at. To Julian, they were just papers, ledgers, ranch bookkeeping, the dull work of poor people. He had no idea he was looking at his own grave. "Sit," Eleanor said. "I'll stand. Suit yourself." She sat and folded her hands and looked up at him with a calm that seemed to unnerve him more than shouting would have. "You said I have no proof. Let's talk about proof, Julian. Let's talk about what I've been doing out here in the mud." "Eleanor, you had the bank move Cole's payment up 60 days, she said, "right after I arrived, to pressure him, to create the default you needed." She slid a paper across the table. "The bank's investors trace back through 3 shell companies to an entity called Meridian Holdings. Meridian Holdings is yours, Julian. You control it. I have the incorporation records. It took my father's lawyer 9 days to untangle it, but he untangled it, and it's all right there in your own name." Julian didn't look at the paper, but he didn't need to. Eleanor watched his face, and she saw him begin for the first time to take her seriously. "The Caldwell water rights," she continued, "purchased 2 months before I ever set foot in Montana, through another shell, also yours. You bought the neighboring rights specifically so you could invoke that flawed agreement and choke this ranch dry. Except the agreement wasn't as flawed as you thought, was it? Your lawyer found that out at the creek last week?" She slid another paper across. "That's the purchase record. Your signatures on the transfer. You were sloppy, Julian. You were always sloppy because you never imagined anyone would look." The lawyer beside Julian had gone pale. He leaned in and murmured something. Julian waved him off, but his eyes had stopped being amused. "And then," Eleanor said, and now her voice dropped, went soft and terrible, "there's the will." "There is no other will," Julian said flatly. "There is." She didn't slide this paper across. She held it up so he could see it, but not touch it. "This is a certified copy filed with the probate court of Papa's true last will and testament, dated 3 days before his death, witnessed by 2 men, both still living, both willing to testify. It leaves me 1/3 of the entire Whitmore estate, Julian. 1/3. Which you stole by forging a replacement, which is a felony in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, punishable by years in a state prison." Julian lunged for the paper. Eleanor pulled it back, and Cole took a single step forward, and the enforcer at the door tensed, and for one razor's edge of a moment, the whole room hung on the brink of violence. "Sit down, Julian," Eleanor said, and her voice cracked like a whip. And Julian Whitmore, who had never once in his life been told to sit by his useless sister, sat. "That's a copy," Eleanor said quietly, setting the paper back into its stack. "There are 3 more like it. One with my lawyer in Boston. One with a judge who owes my father a favor from 30 years back. And one sealed with instructions to be opened by the district attorney if anything should happen to me." She let that land. "So if you're wondering right now whether your man by the door could solve this problem tonight, the answer is no. My death is the one thing that guarantees you go to prison. I made sure of it before you ever rode up my road." The color drained entirely from Julian's face, because he had been wondering. Eleanor had seen it the exact moment the thought crossed his mind, and she'd cut it off at the root. "You've been busy," he said hoarsely. "I've had 6 weeks," Eleanor said. And 10 years of watching you learning exactly how you cheat before that. You taught me everything, Julian. Every dinner where you bragged about a deal you'd swindled. Every night you thought I wasn't listening. I was always listening. I was memorizing you. And now I know you better than you know yourself." For a long moment, Julian Whitmore said nothing. Then slowly, his composure came back. Not all of it, but enough, the smooth, calculating mask sliding back over his fear. Because Julian was cornered, but Julian was clever too, and a cornered, clever man is at his most dangerous. "All right," he said. "All right, sister. You've been thorough, I'll grant you that. But let's think this through, shall we? Like family. Like reasonable people." He leaned back. "You have evidence. Fine. But evidence is only a threat until it's used. The moment you use it, you go to war with the entire Whitmore fortune. My lawyers, real lawyers, Eleanor. An army of them will bury you in appeals for a decade. They'll question every witness, challenge every document, drag your name and your Cowboy's name through every newspaper in the country. You might win in 10 years if you're lucky, but you'll be ruined and broke and old before you see a dollar of it. Is that worth it? For this?" He gestured contemptuously at the ranch around them. "For a pile of debt and dirt. And this, Eleanor knew, was the real fight. Not the evidence. The nerve. Julian was betting she didn't have the stomach for the long war, that the useless girl would still in the end take the easy path." "You're right," Eleanor said. Julian blinked. "I'm what?" "You're right, that a long war would ruin us both. 10 years of lawyers, newspapers, appeals. It would cost me everything, and it would cost you everything, and in the end, we'd both be too broke and too old to enjoy whatever was left." She nodded slowly. "So let's not do that. Let's do something else." Julian's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm going to make you an offer," Eleanor said. "One offer. Tonight. And you're going to take it because the alternative is prison, and you know it." The room went silent. Even Cole across the room was staring at her now, uncertain where this was going. "Here's the offer," Eleanor said. "You sign 3 documents tonight in front of these witnesses. First, you sign over the real inheritance. My full third of the estate, restored effective immediately. Not fought. Not appealed. Restored. Second, you sign over the Caldwell water rights and dissolve every claim against this ranch. Every debt Meridian holds against Cole, you forgive tonight in writing. Third," she paused, "you sign a full confession of the forgery. Dated, witnessed, sealed." Julian laughed, sharp and disbelieving. "A confession? You're insane. I'd never—" "You'll hold the confession yourself," Eleanor cut in. "You keep it. It never sees a courtroom, never sees a newspaper, never sees the light of day, as long as you leave us alone. The moment you move against this ranch, against Cole, against me ever again, in any way, the confession goes to the district attorney along with everything else. It's not a weapon I use, Julian. It's a leash I hold." She leaned forward. "You keep your fortune. You keep your name. You keep your freedom. You lose only the 1/3 that was always mine, and the ranch you never had a right to, and the ability to ever hurt me again. That's the trade. Prison or peace. Choose." Julian stared at her. "You're bluffing about the confession," he said slowly. "No one signs a confession. It's madness. If you ever betrayed the terms, then we'd both fall," Eleanor said. "Yes, that's the point. It binds us both. You can't move against me without me destroying you, but I can't reveal it without revealing my own hand and losing the leverage. It's mutual ruin Julian held in perfect balance. It's the only kind of peace that lasts between people like us, because it's the only kind neither of us can break without breaking ourselves." She held his gaze. "You always understood leverage better than love. So understand this. I'm offering you a way to walk out of here with everything except the 2 things you stole. Take it, because if you don't—" She reached into the stack and pulled out one final paper. "Then tomorrow morning this goes to the district attorney in Boston, along with certified copies of everything else. And you spend the next 10 years learning what it feels like to be the powerless one at the end of the table." Julian looked at the paper. He looked at his sister, really looked at her for what might have been the first time in his life. And Eleanor saw at last the exact thing she'd been waiting 10 years to see in his face: fear, real fear. The fear of a man who has finally understood that the person he underestimated has been the smartest one in the room the entire time. "You'd really do it," he said quietly. "You'd send your own brother to prison. You forged my father's will while his body was still warm," Eleanor said, and her voice didn't waver. "You stole from me for 10 years. You sent me across a continent to destroy an innocent man. You had your enforcer wondering if he should kill me not 5 minutes ago." She stood. "You were never my brother Julian. You were the man who was supposed to protect me and chose to prey on me instead. So no, I wouldn't feel a thing. Now sign." For a long, long moment the kitchen held its breath. The lawyer beside Julian leaned in one final time, and whatever he whispered, Eleanor caught the end of it. "She has us, Julian. The paper trail alone. Take the deal. Take it and let's go." Julian closed his eyes. And then slowly, the great Julian Whitmore, who had never lost, who had never been caught, who had built an empire on the certainty that no one would ever dare, reached for the pen Eleanor slid across the table. His hand hovered over the first document. "How long?" he said without looking up. "Did you know that first day when you got off the train and let me think you'd do it? How long had you already decided to betray me?" Eleanor considered the question honestly. "I didn't decide on the train," she said. "I decided about 2 weeks in. There was an evening on the porch. Cole told me about his parents buried up on that ridge. 3 babies his mother lost before he came. A father who broke this land with his own hands and told him, 'You don't abandon what owns you.'" She looked at Cole across the room, and something in her face softened that Julian had never once put there. "And I realized I'd been sent to salt a good man's grave for the sin of owning water, and I found I'd rather die than do it. That's when I decided. That's when I stopped being what you made me." "Sentiment," Julian said with a ghost of his old contempt. "It'll ruin you, sister." "No," Eleanor said. "It saved me. You should try it sometime. Though I don't think you have it in you." She tapped the paper. "Sign." And Julian Whitmore signed. He signed the restoration of her inheritance, his pen scratching in the silence. He signed the dissolution of every claim against Barrett Creek, the forgiveness of every manufactured debt. And then, with his lawyer witnessing, and Cole watching, and the enforcer standing helpless by the door, he signed the confession, the full-dated sealed admission of forgery that would be the leash around his neck for the rest of his life. When it was done, he set down the pen and stood, and for a moment the two of them just looked at each other across the table, the brother and the sister, the thief and the woman he'd tried to make into a weapon. "I underestimated you," Julian said. "Everyone does," Eleanor said. "You just paid more for it than most." Julian gathered his lawyer with a glance and turned to go. At the door he paused and looked back, not at Eleanor, but at Cole. "You," he said. "Cowboy, you have no idea what you married." Cole met his eyes without flinching. "I've got a real good idea," he said. "It's the best thing that ever happened to me. Now get off my land." Julian's mouth twisted. He said nothing more. He walked out into the dark, mounted his horse, and rode away into the night with his lawyer and his useless enforcer trailing behind him back toward Boston. Back toward a life that would never again be quite so certain of itself, carrying a signed confession that would keep him honest until the day he died. The hoofbeats faded, and then they were gone. For a long moment, neither Eleanor nor Cole moved. The lamps burned. The papers sat in their careful stacks, the papers that had just, without a single shot fired, without a single day in court, won everything. Then Eleanor's legs gave out. She sat down hard in the kitchen chair, and her whole body began to shake, the reaction she'd held back for 6 weeks for the whole terrible standoff crashing through her all at once. And Cole crossed the room in 3 strides, and knelt beside her, and took both her shaking hands in his, exactly the way he had by the creek. "You did it. he said, his voice rough with wonder. "Eleanor, you walked the man who owned your whole life into this kitchen, and you took it back, all of it. Your money, my ranch, everything. Without firing a shot, without a courtroom. You beat him with paper." "I beat him with the truth," Eleanor said, and now the tears were coming freely, 10 years of them. "The truth and the fact that he never once believed I was clever enough to find it. His arrogance built the trap, Cole. I just held the door open and waited for him to walk in." "You're crying," Cole said gently. "I know. You just won everything and you're crying." "I know." She laughed through the tears wiping at her face. I don't know how to feel it, Cole. Happiness. I've been fighting for so long. My whole life. I don't know how to be safe. I don't know how to sit in a room and not be watching the door." She looked at him, helpless and open in a way she'd never let herself be. "How do I do that? How do I stop fighting?" And Cole Barrett, kneeling in the lamplight beside the woman everyone had called useless, the woman who had just saved his family's grave and taken back her own stolen life, gave her the only answer he had. "You don't have to know how tonight," he said. "You just have to know you're not doing it alone anymore." He squeezed her hands. "Whatever comes next, the ranch, your inheritance, the whole rest of it, you don't fight it alone. That's over. You've got me now. For as long as you'll have me." Eleanor looked at him for a long, long time. And then slowly, for the first time since she'd stepped off that train 6 weeks ago, carrying nothing but a suitcase full of ledgers and a heart full of other people's contempt, Eleanor Whitmore stopped watching the door. "I'll have you," she said quietly. "For a good deal longer than that, I think." Cole smiled. Outside, the Montana night was still and vast, and finally completely theirs. The creek ran free across their land, the graves on the ridge slept undisturbed, and in the warm, lamplit kitchen, two people who had each been fighting alone their whole lives sat together in the sudden, strange, unfamiliar quiet of having won and began without quite knowing it, yet the slow and careful work of learning how to build a life instead of merely surviving one. The war was over. Everything else was about to begin. The strange quiet lasted exactly 4 days. On the 5th morning, Eleanor woke before dawn out of 10 years of habit, reached for the fear that had lived in her chest her whole life, and found it gone. In its place was something she had no name for, a lightness, an openness, the terrifying freedom of a woman with nothing left to run from. She didn't know what to do with it, so she did what she always did. She went to the ledgers. Cole found her there an hour later, surrounded by papers, but different papers now. Not defense. Not evidence. Not the desperate arithmetic of survival. These were covered in something new, figures that climbed instead of falling, plans that built instead of merely holding. "You're at it again," he said, setting a cup of coffee beside her. "Woman, we won. You're allowed to rest. Allowed to. I know." She looked up, and her eyes were bright, in a way he hadn't seen before. Not the hard brightness of battle, but something warmer, hungrier. "Cole, sit down. I have to show you something, and I need you to keep an open mind because it's going to sound like madness." He sat. "You saved my ranch with what sounded like madness. I'm listening." Eleanor spread the papers across the table. "For 6 weeks," she said, "I've been fighting to keep this ranch from dying. But Cole, I've spent so much time studying every inch of it that I know something now. This ranch isn't just meant to survive. It's meant to be the biggest operation in western Montana, maybe the biggest in the territory. And I know exactly how to get it there." Cole picked up one of the papers, frowned at the columns of figures. "This is a lot of numbers for a man who counts cattle on his fingers." "Then let me translate," Eleanor said, and she leaned in, and the words came pouring out of her 6 weeks of pent-up vision, finally set loose. "Your creek. The one Julian tried to steal. It's the most valuable thing in this whole county, and nobody understands why, including you, until now. Water, Cole. In a dry country, water is everything. Every rancher around us is one bad summer from ruin because they don't have reliable water. But we do. That creek runs even in drought. Which means we don't just survive the dry years, we're the only ones who thrive in them. And that helps us how? Because in a drought, when everyone else is desperate to sell cattle they can't feed or water, we're the only ones who can buy. Cheap. And then when the rains come back, we sell high. She tapped the paper. But that's just the start. Your breeding stock is mediocre, no offense. Some taken. But it's fixable. I've been studying bloodlines. If we bring in the right bulls, invest in real breeding science instead of just letting the herd multiply by accident in 3 years, we're not selling ordinary cattle. We're selling premium breeding stock to every ranch in the territory, at 3 times the price. She pulled another paper. And that's still not the biggest idea. Cole was leaning forward now, despite himself. What's the biggest idea? The cooperative. The what? Eleanor stood too full of it to sit still. Every rancher around us is drowning coal, same as you were. Bad contracts, cheating suppliers, no leverage against the eastern buyers who set the prices. They're all fighting alone exactly the way you were before I got here. But what if they didn't have to? Her eyes were blazing now. What if we brought them together, a cooperative? All the small ranches pooling their cattle, negotiating as one. Together, we'd have the size to demand real prices from the eastern markets. Together, we'd have the buying power to get feed at a fair rate. Together, none of us would ever be small enough to bully again. Cole stared at her. You want to help the neighbors, the same neighbors whose lawyer tried to divert my creek 2 weeks ago. The Caldwells were pawns, Cole. Julian bought them and used them. Most of those ranchers are just scared people trying to survive. Eleanor sat back down and took his hands. I know these people. Not personally, but I know their type. I was their type. Powerless. Underestimated. Certain the game was rigged against them. And it is rigged, Cole. But it stops being rigged the moment the small people stop fighting alone and start fighting together. She squeezed his hands. That's what I learned from Julian. Not how to cheat. How power actually works. And I want to use every bit of it to lift these people up instead of grinding them down. Because that's the difference between him and me. That's the whole difference. Cole was quiet for a long moment, looking at this woman who 6 weeks ago had stepped off a train as his executioner and was now proposing to turn his failing ranch into the beating heart of a whole region's survival. You really believe we can do all this? He said. I don't believe it, Eleanor said. I know it. The same way I knew about your feed and your debt and the flaw in the water agreement. It's just numbers, Cole. And people. And I understand both. She paused. But I can't do it without you. The vision is mine, but the trust is yours. These ranchers will never listen to a Boston woman with fancy ideas. They'll listen to Cole Barrett, who's one of them who's worked this land with his own hands. You're the face. I'm the mind. Together. Together we build an empire. Cole finished quietly. Together we build something that lasts, Eleanor corrected. An empire's just a thing one man owns. I don't want that. I want something that outlives us both. Something that's still lifting people up when we're up on that ridge with your parents. She looked at him. Will you build it with me? Cole Barrett looked at his wife. And somewhere in the last 6 weeks, without quite deciding when he'd started thinking of her exactly that way, not as an accident of a forced marriage, but as the truest partner a man could ask for, and he did the only thing a wise man could do. Tell me where to start, he said. They started small because Eleanor was too smart to start big. The first rancher they approached was a leathery old widower named Tom Halloran, whose spread bordered theirs to the south and who'd been one bad season from foreclosure for 3 years running. Cole rode out alone to talk to him. Eleanor's idea, one man to another. No fancy papers, no city talk. Just a cowboy telling a neighbor he'd found a way through. Halloran listened. Halloran was skeptical. Halloran said he'd think about it. 2 days later, Halloran rode up to Barrett Creek and asked to see the woman with the numbers. Eleanor sat him down at the same kitchen table where she'd broken her brother, and she didn't oversell, didn't dazzle, didn't talk down. She just showed him plainly, patiently, exactly how much money his current feed contract was bleeding him. Exactly how much more he'd get for his cattle selling through a cooperative. Exactly how the arithmetic of survival could become the arithmetic of getting ahead. Halloran studied the figures for a long time. Then he took off his hat the way men out here did when something moved them, and he said, "Ma'am, I've been ranching 40 years, and no one ever once sat me down and showed me the math. They just let me lose." "Why are you doing this?" "Because someone let me lose my whole life," Eleanor said. "And I'm done watching it happen to good people." Tom Halloran joined the cooperative that afternoon. He was the first. He was not the last. Because Tom Halloran talked. Ranchers talked over fences at the feed store at church on Sundays. And the story spread the way stories do on the frontier of the Barrett spread. And the Boston woman who could look at your books and find money you didn't know you'd lost, who'd cut her own husband's debt in half in a courtroom, who'd stared down some rich Eastern lawyer at the creek and sent his diggers home with their tails between their legs. By the end of the month, 4 ranches had joined the cooperative. By the end of the summer, 11. And Eleanor Whitmore, who had spent her whole life being told to sit down, be quiet, remember her place, found herself for the first time at the head of a table where everyone was leaning in to hear what she'd say next. It was not all easy. Nothing worth building ever is. There was a rancher named Pruitt who joined the cooperative, took the better feed prices, and then tried to sell his cattle privately on the side, breaking his agreement and undercutting everyone. Eleanor could have crushed him. She had the contracts, the leverage, every legal right. Julian would have crushed him, made an example, salted the earth. She didn't. She rode out to his place alone, sat in his kitchen, and instead of threatening him, asked him why. And it came out his wife was sick. The doctor cost money. He'd panicked and grabbed at the quick cash. So Eleanor rewrote his terms to give him an advance against the season, connected him with a doctor 2 towns over who'd take payments, and told him quietly that if he ever needed help again, he came to her first, before he did something foolish. Pruitt never broke an agreement again. And he told everyone he met that the Barrett woman had had every right to ruin him and chose to save him instead. That story spread too, and it was worth more than any contract. "You could have made an example of him," Cole said that night. "Half these ranchers respect you because they're a little afraid of you. That would have cemented it. Fear's what Julian built on," Eleanor said. "And Julian's going to spend the rest of his life alone, clutching a fortune, terrified of a confession in a drawer. I don't want to build what he built." She looked out toward the ridge. "I want people to follow me because they trust me, not because they're scared of me. It's slower. It's harder. But it's the only kind of thing that doesn't rot from the inside." She smiled faintly. "Besides, a man who's grateful works harder than a man who's afraid. That's just good economics." Cole laughed. "You always circle back to economics." "Everything circles back to economics," Eleanor said. "Even love, especially love. It's just an exchange, Cole, of trust, of loyalty, of showing up when it's hard. The only difference is it's the one exchange where both parties can win everything and lose nothing." She caught herself coloring slightly. "Or so I've read." Cole looked at her across the lamplight, at the color rising in her cheeks, at the woman who could break a man with a paper trail, but blushed at the word love. "So you've read," he said softly. Eleanor found something very interesting to look at in her ledger and did not answer. The autumn brought the first real test of the drought strategy, and it proved Eleanor right in a way that changed everything. The rains failed. The country went dry the way it did every few years, and across the territory, ranchers began the grim math of a hard season. Cattle they couldn't water feed, they couldn't afford herds, they'd have to sell at a loss just to survive. Panic rippled through the small spreads. But Barrett Creek ran on. And while the rest of the county sold desperate and cheap, the cooperative, with its reliable water, its pooled resources, its careful reserves that Eleanor had insisted on building all summer against exactly, this did not panic. They held. They even bought snapping up quality cattle from ruined outfits at prices that would triple when the rains returned. By the time the drought broke, the cooperative had grown from 11 ranches to 19, and every rancher in it had come through a killing season, not just alive, but stronger, while the ranches that had laughed at joining watched their neighbors prosper and quietly came asking to be let in. The eastern buyers noticed too. One of them, a sharp-suited cattle broker named Ferris, who'd been squeezing western ranchers for 20 years, rode all the way out to Barrett Creek to see for himself who'd organized the operation that had suddenly stopped accepting his lowball prices. He expected to negotiate with Cole. He found himself instead across a table from Eleanor. "I'll be honest, ma'am," Ferris said after an hour of getting nowhere. "I came out here figuring I'd deal with some cowboy I could talk in circles. I don't know what I walked into." "You walked into a fair price, Mr. Ferris," Eleanor said. "That's all. For 20 years you've paid these ranchers whatever you liked, because they had to sell to you or watch their cattle starve. That's over. Now they've got 19 ranches, reliable water, and reserves to hold their stock as long as they need. So you don't set the price anymore. The market does. And the market says our cattle are worth a good deal more than you've been paying." She slid a paper across. "That's our number. It's fair. Take it or drive back east empty." Ferris looked at the number. He looked at the woman. "You know," he said slowly, "I've been buying western cattle since before you were born, and I've never once had a rancher stand up to me like this, let alone a—" He stopped himself. "Let alone a woman," Eleanor finished pleasantly. "Yes, I imagine not. But then you've never bought cattle from a cooperative that understood its own leverage before either. Everything's changing, Mr. Ferris. You can change with it and make a fair profit for years to come. Or you can cling to the old way and watch us sell to someone who won't." She folded her hands. "Your choice," Ferris signed. And he came back the next season and the season after that, and eventually he'd tell anyone who'd listen that the smartest cattle deal he ever made was the day he stopped trying to cheat the Barrett woman and started dealing straight with her instead. The money came in. Not all at once. Eleanor was too careful for that, plowing profits back into breeding stock and water infrastructure and the cooperative's reserves. But steadily, surely, the ranch that had been 60 days from foreclosure began to prosper. The debt vanished. The herd grew and grew finer. Eleanor's Dairy and Cheese Cooperative, a whole second venture she'd started almost as an afterthought, began shipping east under the Barrett Creek name and fetching prices that made the neighboring farm wives sit up and take notice. And one by one, those farm wives began coming to Eleanor to ask how she'd done it, to learn the bookkeeping, the negotiating, the arithmetic of not being cheated. She never turned one away. She'd sit them at her kitchen table, the same table where she'd broken Julian, and she'd teach them everything plainly, patiently, the way she wished someone had once taught her. "You're creating competition for yourself," Cole pointed out, once watching a cluster of women bent over ledgers on the porch under Eleanor's instruction. "I'm creating allies," Eleanor said. "There's a difference. A country full of women who understand money is a country where men like Julian can't operate. Every one of those women I teach is one less person who can be cheated, bullied, or shipped across a continent like a piece of property." She watched them, something fierce and tender in her face. "I was useless once, Cole, because everyone told me I was until I almost believed it. I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving that word was a lie, not just about me, about all of us." But the thing that changed everything between them, the thing neither of them had planned, the thing all the ledgers in the world couldn't account for, happened on an ordinary evening on the porch, at the end of an ordinary day when the work was done and the light was low. They'd taken to sitting out there in the evenings, not talking business, just sitting. It had crept up on them slowly, this habit of ending the day side by side, and neither had remarked on it, because remarking on it might have broken the spell. "Can I ask you something?" Cole said that evening. "And you answer honest." "I always answer you honest," Eleanor said. "You're the first person I ever could." Cole turned his hat in his hands, and Eleanor realized with a small start that the man who'd faced down her brother's enforcer without flinching was nervous. "That first day," he said, "when you got off the train, you told me later they sent you to destroy me, to make me sell, to take everything." He kept his eyes on his hat. "And you did the opposite. You saved all of it. My ranch, my family's grave, me." He looked up. "I've been trying to figure out how to thank you for 6 months, and I keep coming up short because there's no thanks big enough. So I stopped trying to thank you. and I started trying to figure out something else. What? How to ask you to stay, Cole said. Not because of a contract some crook in Boston forged, not because you're saving my ranch, not because we make a good business team, though God knows we do. He set the hat down. I'm asking you to stay because somewhere in the last 6 months I fell in love with you, Eleanor Whitmore, and I don't have the first idea what to do about it except tell you the truth and hope to God you feel something back. The porch went very still. Eleanor Whitmore, who had an answer for everything, who could recite property law and cattle prices, and the exact arithmetic of any deal, found for the first time in her life that she had no words at all. Cole, she managed. You don't have to say anything, he said quickly. I know this marriage started as a lie. I know you never chose it. If you want, we go on just as we are partners, and I never bring it up again. Cole, stop talking. He stopped. Eleanor stood up. She crossed the small space between their chairs, and she stood in front of him, and she looked down at this man. This good, honest, patient man who'd given her the first safe place she'd ever known, who'd stood behind her while she fought her whole family, who'd said, "You're not doing it alone anymore," and meant it every single day since. You want to know when I fell in love with you? She said quietly. Cole didn't dare speak. It wasn't a moment, Eleanor said. It was 1,000 small ones. It was you standing up in that courtroom and giving me the credit when you could have taken it. It was you saying you didn't care what I came here to do before you even knew. It was you telling me about your parents on this porch, and me realizing I'd rather burn down Boston than hurt you. It was you kneeling in that kitchen after I confessed everything, and instead of throwing me out asking me what I was now. Her voice caught. No one ever asked me what I was, Cole. They only ever told me. You're the first person who ever wanted to know. Eleanor, I'm not finished. She took his rough hands in hers the way he'd taken hers 100 times. I came here as a weapon. You made me a person. I came here to destroy your home. You made it mine. And somewhere in all of it, without my permission, without my noticing, I stopped being able to imagine a single day of my life that doesn't have you in it. The tears were falling now, but she was smiling through them. So no, Cole Barrett. I won't stay because of a contract. And I won't stay for the ranch. I'll stay because I love you. Because you're the only home I've ever had. And because I'd be a fool to walk away from the one person on earth who ever looked at me and saw something worth keeping. For a moment, Cole Barrett just stared at her, like a man who couldn't quite believe the thing he'd wanted most had actually come true. Then he stood, and he pulled her into his arms, and Eleanor Whitmore, who had never once in her life been held like she was precious, buried her face against his chest, and let herself finally completely be held. They stood like that for a long time, out on the porch, as the light faded over the ridge where his parents slept, and the creek ran free across the land they'd fought for together. We started with a lie, Eleanor said at last, her voice muffled against his shirt. We did, Cole agreed. But everything we built since has been true, every bit of it. She pulled back to look at him. The ranch, the cooperative, the neighbors, us, all of it true. We took the worst thing anyone ever tried to do to either of us, and we turned it into the best thing that ever happened. She shook her head in wonder. Julian sent me here to destroy your life, Cole. Instead, he handed me mine. Cole smiled down at her and brushed the tears from her face with his thumb, and said the thing that neither of them would ever forget. Then I hope wherever he is tonight, he said, he understands exactly what he lost. He had the smartest, bravest, finest woman in the whole country sitting at the end of his table for 10 years, and he was too much of a fool to see it. And his blindness gave you to me. His blindness gave us to each other, Eleanor corrected softly. And out on the porch of the ranch, everyone said a useless bride would destroy under a sky going gold and purple over land that would carry both their names for generations. Cole Barrett kissed his wife for the first time, not because any contract said he should, but because he loved her, and Eleanor. Whitmore kissed him back freely, gladly, completely. A woman who had walked into her life as someone else's weapon, and had through her own courage and wit, and stubborn refusal to be small, made herself the architect of everything good that surrounded her. The war had made them partners. The work had made them a team. But this quiet, this trust, this choosing each other freely in the fading light, this had made them at long last a family. And the ranch prospered, and the cooperative grew, and the woman once called useless became the person the whole county came to for wisdom. But all of that, every acre and every dollar and every grateful neighbor mattered less to Eleanor Whitmore than the simple, staggering, hard-won fact that she had finally, after 25 years, found a place where she was loved, and a man who would spend the rest of his life making sure she never doubted it again. 10 years did not so much pass as build. Each season laid another stone on the last, until the ranch that had once been 60 days from foreclosure had become something no one who'd stood in that dusty yard a decade ago could have imagined. Barrett Creek was the largest agricultural operation in western Montana now, and the cooperative Eleanor had started with one skeptical widower named Halloran had grown into 43 ranches spread across 3 counties, feeding families that would otherwise have starved out and gone east. But the morning it all came to a head, the morning that would put Eleanor Whitmore's name in newspapers from Denver to Boston, began like all the important ones with a letter. Cole found her on the porch with it in her hands, unopened, her face gone still in a way he hadn't seen in years. "Boston postmark," he said quietly, sitting down beside her. 10 years of marriage had taught him to read her like his own land. "That's your brother's hand on the front, or I've forgotten it. It's his hand." Eleanor turned the envelope over. "First letter he sent in 10 years. 10 years of silence, Cole. The confession did its work. He left us alone exactly as I planned." She ran her thumb along the seal. "So, why is he writing now?" Only one way to find out. She opened it. She read it once in silence. Then she read it again, and Cole watched something move across his wife's face that he'd almost never seen there. Not fear, not triumph, but a strange, complicated grief. "He's dying," Eleanor said at last. Cole went still. "Consumption. His doctors give him a few months." She lowered the letter. "He's not asking for money. He's not asking for the confession back. He's asking—" Her voice wavered. "He's asking me to come to Boston. Before the end. He says there are things he needs to say to my face. He says he's had 10 years to think about the man he was, and he doesn't want to die as that man." "You don't owe him a thing," Cole said, low and immediate. "Not one thing, Eleanor. After what he did, I know what he did." She folded the letter. "Better than anyone alive. He stole my inheritance. He shipped me across a continent to destroy an innocent man. He had an enforcer wondering whether to kill me in that very kitchen." She looked out toward the ridge. "I don't owe him forgiveness, Cole. You're right about that. But I've spent 10 years building something out of what he did to me. And I think—" She paused, choosing the words carefully. "I think I need to look him in the eye one last time, not as the frightened girl he shipped away, but as the woman I made myself into. Not for his sake, for mine. So the last thing he ever sees of me isn't the useless sister he thought he owned. It's the truth of what I became." Cole was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood and held out his hand. "Then we go to Boston," he said. You think I'd let you walk into that snake pit alone? After 10 years? He almost smiled. "I go where you go, Eleanor. That was true the day I meant it, and it's true today. Pack your bag. I'll have the tickets by nightfall." The Boston they returned to was not the Boston Eleanor had left. Or rather, it was exactly the same, and she was not. She walked through the same marble halls where men had once pushed her into corners, past the same dining rooms where she'd been the plain, clever, overlooked girl at the end of the table, and she felt none of the old shrinking. She wore a plain dark traveling dress, worth 1/10 of what these people spent on gloves, and she walked through their world like she owned it because she had learned out on the frontier that a person's worth had nothing to do with the silk they wore. Julian was propped up in a bed in the great house Eleanor had grown up unloved in. The consumption had hollowed him out. The handsome, cold man who'd ridden up her road 10 years ago was a gray shadow now coughing into a handkerchief, his fortune arrayed uselessly around him in the form of a house too big and too empty to comfort a dying man. He looked at his sister in the doorway for a long time. "You came," he said, hoarse with disbelief. "I didn't think you would. I wouldn't have in your place." "I almost didn't." Eleanor stepped into the room. Cole stayed by the door, a silent, solid presence at her back. "My husband told me I didn't owe you anything. He was right. I don't." "No," Julian agreed. "You don't." He gestured weakly at the chair beside the bed. "But you're here. So sit. Please. A dying man's last vanity. I'd like to look at you while I say this." She sat. And Julian Whitmore, stripped of his power, his health, and finally his certainty, said the thing Eleanor had waited her entire life to hear and had long since stopped expecting. "I was wrong about you," he said. "About everything. I spent 30 years looking at you and seeing something small, useless. A girl who read books and understood nothing. And you," he coughed, pressed the handkerchief to his mouth, went on, "you were the sharpest mind in the whole family. Sharper than father, sharper than me. And I could never admit that, because if you were more than I thought, then I was less. So I told myself you were nothing. I built my whole life on that lie." His eyes sunk deep and his gray face found hers. "And you took the very thing I sent to destroy that cowboy, took the ruin I planned for you, and you built an empire out of it. I read about you, you know, even here. The woman who saved Montana ranching. My useless sister, in the papers." "I'm not useless, Julian," Eleanor said quietly. "I never was. You just needed me to be. I know that now." Something broke in the dying man's face. "I know it now when it's too late to matter. That's the punishment, isn't it? Not the confession in your drawer. This, lying here understanding finally exactly what I threw away. I had the finest person in this family sitting at the end of my table for 30 years, and I was too small a man to see it. And now I die alone in a house full of things. And you," his voice cracked, "you have a husband who crossed a continent to stand in my doorway and glare at me. You have people who love you. You have a life that means something. And I have this." The room was silent but for his labored breathing. Eleanor looked at her brother for a long moment, and she found to her surprise that the fury she'd carried for a decade had burned down to something quieter. Not forgiveness, she wasn't sure she'd ever forgive, and she wasn't sure she should, but something. Pity, maybe. The pity of the free for the imprisoned. "You want me to tell you it's all right," she said, "that I forgive you, so you can die easy. I want—" Julian stopped. "Yes, I suppose I do, but I've no right to ask it." "No," Eleanor agreed. "You don't." She stood, and she looked down at him, and she gave him the only truth she had, which was harder than forgiveness, and kinder too. "I won't tell you it's all right, Julian, because it isn't. What you did was wrong, and it stayed wrong, and no deathbed changes that. But I'll tell you this. I'm not going to carry you anymore. I've hauled the weight of what you did to me across a whole continent and 10 years, and I'm setting it down now, right here on this floor. Not for you. For me. Because I have a life to get back to, and it's too good a life to spend one more day of it angry at a dying man." She paused. "That's not forgiveness. It's freedom. Mine. And it's the last thing you'll ever give me, whether you meant to or not." Julian Whitmore closed his eyes. A tear ran down into the hollow of his cheek. "You're a better person than I ever was," he whispered. "By a distance I can't measure." "I had to be," Eleanor said. "You left me no choice." She turned to go. At the door, Cole's hand found the small of her back, steadying present the way it had been for 10 years, and Julian's voice, thin and failing, followed her out. "Eleanor." She stopped. "The confession," he said, "in your drawer. When I'm gone, burn it. You won't need it anymore. And I'd like to think one thing between us ends clean." Eleanor considered that. "I'll burn it," she said, "when you're gone. Not because you asked. Because a woman as free as I am doesn't need to hold a dead man's leash." And then, because she was who she was, and because even now some part of her was the sister who'd once loved him before she learned what he was, she added more gently, "Goodbye, Julian. I hope at the end you find some peace. I truly do." She walked out. She did not look back. Julian Whitmore died 3 weeks later. Eleanor burned the confession the day the news reached Montana, standing at the same hearth where she'd once broken him, watching 10 years of leverage curl into ash. Cole stood beside her. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing to say. A chapter had closed, and the closing of it left her lighter than she'd been in her entire life. "Any regrets?" Cole asked as the last of it burned. "One," Eleanor said, "that he never once in his whole life got to be the man he finally understood he should have been. That's the saddest thing I know, Cole. Not dying. Dying and only understanding at the very end what you wasted." She turned from the fire. "Which is exactly why I'm never going to waste a single day of what we built. Not one." And she didn't. The years that followed were the fullest of Eleanor Whitmore's life. The cooperative crossed 50 ranches, then 60. The Barrett Creek name became a mark of quality shipped to markets she'd once only read about. But the thing she was proudest of, the thing that would outlast every acre and every dollar, grew out of all those farm wives and daughters who'd come to her kitchen table over the years to learn the arithmetic of not being cheated. Because one morning, Eleanor looked at Cole across the breakfast table and said, "I want to build a school." "We've got a school," Cole said. "Built it 3 years back for the cooperative kids. Not that kind of school." Eleanor's eyes had the old blaze in them. The one Cole had learned meant the world was about to change shape around her. "A real one. For women. To teach them what my father taught me: bookkeeping, contracts, agriculture, business law. Everything a woman needs to never be shipped across a continent like a piece of property. Everything I needed and had to steal in secret because no one would teach a girl outright." She leaned forward. "There are thousands of Eleanors out there, Cole. Girls being told they're useless right now this minute, all across this country. Girls with minds like mine and no one to trust them. I want to build the place I needed, and I want to fill it." Cole set down his coffee. He looked at his wife of many years, still fierce, still brilliant, still the finest thing that ever stepped off a train into his dusty life. "Barrett Agricultural Academy," he said slowly, trying the words. "You've been thinking about the name. I've been thinking you'd get to this eventually," Cole said, and he smiled. "You've been building toward it your whole life. Every woman you sat at that table, every ledger you taught, this was always where you were headed." He reached across and took her hand. "Build your school, Eleanor. Fill it up. I'll build the walls with my own 2 hands if that's what it takes. God knows the world needs more of you in it." The Barrett Agricultural Academy opened its doors on a bright spring morning, and half the territory came to see it. Young women had traveled from across the frontier to enroll daughters of ranchers, of shopkeepers, of failed farmers, girls who'd been told all their lives to keep quiet and keep small, arriving now with trunks and hope, and the desperate hunger of minds that had never been allowed to feed. Eleanor had built it exactly as she'd dreamed, plain and solid and serious, a place where a girl's cleverness was treated as a gift instead of a threat. And the newspapers came. The same newspapers that 20 years earlier had run the sneering little items out of Boston: "The useless Whitmore girl shipped west to a cowboy, she'll ruin him in a month," sent reporters now to write about the woman who'd done exactly the opposite. One of them, a young man from a Denver paper, cornered Cole during the opening ceremony while Eleanor was across the grounds down among the students, showing a nervous 16-year-old how to read her first ledger rather than standing on any stage. "Mr. Barrett," the reporter said, pencil ready, "I have to ask, everyone's talking about your wife, the woman who saved Montana ranching, they're calling her. The cooperative, the academy, all of it. It's an extraordinary story." He glanced across the grounds to where Eleanor was laughing with her students. When did you first realize your wife was someone extraordinary?" Cole Barrett was quiet for a moment. He watched his wife across the yard, gray in her hair. Now fine lines at the corners of the eyes that had once measured him from a wagon seat, but the same woman, exactly the same, still bending down to lift someone up, still finding the overlooked girl in the crowd and handing her the tools no one else would. And he thought about all the answers he could give. The courtroom, the creek, the night she broke her brother at their kitchen table. The morning she'd spread her impossible plans across the ledgers and said this ranch is meant to be the biggest in Montana. But when he answered, he chose the truest thing he knew. "The day everyone told me she'd destroy my ranch," Cole said. The reporter's pencil stopped. He looked up confused. "I'm sorry the day they told you she'd destroy it." "That's right." Cole's eyes stayed on Eleanor. "Before she ever got here, everyone in Boston sent word ahead. Said they were shipping me a useless bride. Said she knew books and not life. Said she'd ruin the whole operation inside a month." He almost laughed. "They were right, you know. Every word." The reporter stared. "I don't understand." Cole turned to him, and there was something in his weathered face that the young man would remember for the rest of his life. "She destroyed my ranch," Cole said quietly. "She destroyed the debt that was strangling it. She destroyed the fear I'd been ranching under my whole life. She destroyed my pride and my bad habits, and every small, scared way of thinking that had kept this place dying for a generation. She walked in, and she tore all of it down to the ground." He looked back at Eleanor. "And then, she built something in its place that's bigger than a ranch. Bigger than anything I could have dreamed up alone. She took the thing everyone swore would ruin me, took herself the useless bride, the weapon they sent to destroy me, and she made it the best thing that ever happened to this land and to me and to every soul in that cooperative and this school. So yes, they said she'd destroy my ranch." He smiled. "She did. Thank God she did." Across the grounds, as if she'd felt his eyes. Eleanor looked up. Their gazes met across 20 years and 40 acres of everything they'd built together. And she smiled at him, the same steady, certain smile she'd worn stepping off that train, the smile of a woman who had always known exactly what she was, even when the whole world insisted otherwise. Then she turned back to her students, to the next overlooked girl, to the next mind waiting to be told for the first time that it mattered. The reporter wrote his story. It ran on the front page, and the headline set in bold black type and carried east on the very rail lines that had once shipped a frightened girl west to her ruin, read "The woman who built an empire from the ruins they sent her to make." But Eleanor never much cared for headlines. What she cared for stood all around her that day, and every day after the ranch. That thrived, the neighbors who prospered, the daughters who learned, the husband who had looked at a weapon in a silk dress and seen before she could even see it herself, a partner, an equal, a home. She had arrived in Montana as the useless bride sent to destroy a cowboy's farm. She had spent the rest of her life proving that the only thing more powerful than the labels others place upon us is the truth we build with our own two hands. And the truth Eleanor Whitmore built was this: plain and permanent and impossible to take away a person's worth is never measured by the names the world assigns them, but by what they choose to become. And no one, not a brother, not a bank, not an entire city of doubters, can destroy the empire that a determined soul decides to build.